V, and we'll come to you live. And I have my main man here, Mathew. Mathew is no stranger to this show at this point. If you don't know who he is, Mathew J. Ehret is the editor-in-chief of the Canadian Patriot Review. He is the founder of the Montreal-based Rising Tide Foundation. His works are regularly featured on Strategic Culture, the Duran, Hedge, Fort Russ, Lou Rockwell, Global Research, Dissident Voice, Off Guardian, and the Greanville Post. He's the author of the Untold History of Canada book series, and he can be reached at matt.ehret at tutamail.com. The links are all in the description box. Matt, there's so many things going on right now, and you are one of the most brilliant geostrategic minds that I love to listen to. So where do you want to begin, my man?
Well, I think that you and I had talked a little bit about the thing that is on everyone's mind, which happened earlier this week, of the bombing, or the bombing, I shouldn't say that, the explosions that took place in Lebanon.
Yeah.
And what is possibly going on behind, around, before, and after that strange event happened, to sort of give it a bit of context. I think that's a good place to start.
Let's discuss that, man. Let's dissect that, and let's really look at it. Is this just a random accident? Is it, and I'm not even going to get into, kinetic weapons. I'm not even going to get into any of that. But just the fact that, why are these random explosions happening in select countries?
Yeah, right. Yeah.
So take it away, Mathew.
Yeah, no, I think that's the big question. First of all, is like, why more so than what happened, but why is always more important. And I encounter a lot of people, obviously, in my line of work who are big. Conspiracies are part of life; they're part of history, and so right. People often think about what were the mechanisms that caused JFK's death, or Lincoln's murder, or you could name a conspiracy. And they spend years of their lives, and there's books and books written about topics that try to get the individual names of the shooters, the 2, 3, the 4 shooters, whatever it was, the 12 shooters for either case. And they will just pull down the mechanism after mechanism, and they'll never ask the right question, which is why. Why did Lincoln die? Why did JFK die? And I'm saying this because I think that this method of thinking, of focusing on why, is so much more valuable and so much more underused than people realize, because that gets you more at the heart of it, the issue, and the mechanisms sometimes matter less. For example, if you look at what were they doing, what policies were JFK and Lincoln committed to throughout their entire presidencies and the decades even before both became president, what orientation did they envision for the world that they then gave every ounce of their energy towards manifesting into reality while they had political power, and who within that framework would have lost power, what interests that perhaps even guide our current world would have lost their ability to influence world policy had JFK or Lincoln's program been a success. And people often skip that step and they just jump straight into details, and you miss the forest for the trees. So I think that's what I'd like to do here. As you pointed out, there's a lot of anomalies. The Lebanon situation, as people, I'm sure all of your viewers know, but I'll just run through it. The details were that there was 2,700 tons of ammonium nitrate that exploded in the port of Beirut. And that explosion was really quite an astounding picture. I see that you've got some images of it there.
Yeah, this is from a negative. Keep watching. Boom.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. See, that is really an extraordinary explosion. I mean, and that thing caused a lot of damage. Over 130 people are dead, 4,000 injured. They say something like 200,000 people might be without homes for a period, and $3.5 to $4 billion of damage occurred as well. The official story goes that this ammonium nitrate was stored for 6 years. A Russian shipping company decided, for whatever reason, to just leave it there. It was forgotten about, not guarded, and just remained there for 6 years until somehow a spark flew. Maybe it was a missile. Some people say those things can be doctored. So there's some videos that implicate the idea of maybe a missile, but again, all of this is very speculative. What we also find is an anomaly is that Hezbollah has not claimed that this was an Israeli attack. The Israeli Defense Forces have not claimed that this was something that they were responsible for. And usually both of those players, who have historically been major enemies, have no problem whatsoever calling each other out whenever anything happens, even if one of them didn't do it. So it's the fact that both of them have been rather temperate on that is an anomaly as well. Whether that can be believed, I don't think that one should necessarily leap to that conclusion that either one of them are telling the truth. There might be higher elements in the equation. As you pointed out to me, there have been a string of other explosions rocking the Middle East. I think you wrote to me and sent me a link to the UAE, which 3 days ago suffered an explosion in one of its busiest markets, which luckily was unoccupied since the whole COVID thing shut down that marketplace. So damage, material damage was caused, but no loss of life. Iran has seen a sequence of explosions, and these are, one could say, for the Iranian case, this is most likely Israeli and other intelligence forces. From June 26th, there was an explosion that rocked the Kojir missile production complex. You had June 30th, a medical clinic with 19 dead had exploded. July 2nd, there was a fire at the Natanz nuclear facility, which has destroyed their centrifuge production and delayed that whole process for months. You had fires at the Bushehr aluminum plant port in Bushehr, so that was July 11th. You've had this whole sequence of things that have accelerated as far as just destructive acts. And we know obviously who the main culprit is. I just alluded to it. So when people are speculating about these things, I think they have to really look at the whole, like I said, the forest first before analyzing all the trees and all of the stochastic interactions of the parts. Israel, Lebanese relations, or Syria, Israel relations, or whatever. I think they have to look at the whole first, and that means what we have to realize is that there is, and this has been the topic of our recent discussions, you and I, there's a clash between two systems globally, two operating systems internationally, which currently happen to coexist, but cannot continue to coexist indefinitely, especially since the unipolar model, the one that is run by the City of London and Wall Street, with their entire intelligence apparatus thereby associated in military-industrial complex. It's one integrated system that's concentrated in Europe and North America. Not to say it doesn't have influence everywhere, but that's the concentration base of operation. That unipolar agenda is in a state of melting down. And then you have this alternative model, which has gained huge influence, especially over the past few years, of the multipolar alliance led by Russia, China. The 135 nations are on board with the Belt and Road Initiative framework, which is spread increasingly to become the hegemonic investor in Africa and South America, across and now the Middle East is a huge benefactor by a lot of this, which includes a military component too. And both China and Russia have played a very wise and interesting hand, both in Africa, but also in the Middle East. Lebanon, Iran, Iraq, Syria, Afghanistan, a lot of these countries that have been wrecked with chaos for so many years, especially since 9/11, but even before that, since Zbigniew Brzezinski originally started playing the Islamic card in 1979, and you had the whole ouster of the Shah in Iran. But you've had now, for the first time in over 40 years, a chance for a lot of these countries to have some hope. And China has been going in massively into Iran, into all of these zones, along with Russia. Each one, obviously, Russia and China both have talents, where China has the capacity to build long-term, gigantic infrastructure projects. Their military components are relatively weak. Russia, however, doesn't necessarily have as much of an economic construction capability, but their talent has been primarily used in intelligence and military affairs, which we've seen brilliantly since September 2015
Right.
when when Putin decided to no longer accept the conditions of the Middle East and of regime change, where he basically put Russia's body in front of the cannons that were being launched onto Syria, which were supposed to go through a similar Libya-Iraq experience that we had seen disastrously before that. And Russia said no this time. So that pretty much turned the tides forever in the Middle East.
Yep, absolutely. You know, when you look at all the patterns here, it just seems from Yemen, Libya, Syria, you're starting to see a pattern that these are the nations that are in the Middle East that are wanting to be the pivot points of the Middle East in connection with the One Belt, One Road, in connection with the multipolar world. They're the ones being affected. Yes. And any other country and any other supporting countries, like look at Iran, all the stuff that's happening there. You mentioned the explosions and whatnot. And real quick, before you respond to this, Matt, you know, one of my clients who's on the Patreon, named Sue, said it so perfectly, right? She said, I worked in mining in the quarry bottom, and we used ammonium nitrate branded Annabelle. It was mixed with diesel fuel. It does not explode without diesel and takes serious detonators to get it started. We use detonating cord laced through bags of the stuff, and it will not explode if you put a blowtorch on it. The flashes seen prior to the explosions look identical to detonators. I highly doubt this was an accident. This is somebody who's very, very well experienced with dealing with ammonium nitrate, which is the main story that's being put out there. And folks, at the end of the day, whatever the cause is, the point is, like what Mathew said, here's a country, Lebanon, that's been facing, right? And again, when most Westerners think of Lebanon, they think of, what are they, some sort of Sharia law, far back, backwater Middle Eastern fundamentalist Muslim country? No, it's actually a country that's actually led by a Christian president, right? And the predominant strong party there is Hezbollah, a terrorist organization that's looking to lop off heads, but it helps elect a Christian president. Let that ring in for some people. That's going to mess up some people's paradigms right there, Matt. Absolutely. But this is a real struggle here, man. The open economic system is again being attacked by the closed economic system that is headquartered, like as you said, City of London, Wall Street, and all the intelligence and military apparatchiks that make up that cabal.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, and I think that the whole point of the multi-confessional system of government that they have in Lebanon is really quite extraordinary. And I think that every country which has had some, and I'm saying this with knowledge of the 15-year civil war in Lebanon's history and all of the chaos that it's gone through, but in spite of that, it has carved out a system which has a multi-confessional process where you have Shia, Sunni, and Christian coexistence within government, which is really quite astounding how that's been set up. All branches being elected, and there's been a lot of manipulation, a lot of foreign manipulation for decades, going back to French. I mean, Lebanon was a French colony for a very long time, and they've been subject to all sorts of artificially induced civil wars from without and operatives from within. That's part of their experience, their learning. But the fact also, I think one of the individuals who was one of the notable individuals who did die, I just read a little article during this explosion, was the Secretary General of the Kiyan Kateb party of Lebanon, which his name was Nizar Najarian, which I think that this is also known as the Phalange, the oldest party in Lebanon, set up in 1938, who also he died in that explosion. I don't have the story there, but I know that, again, the Maronite Christian Church, which has set up very good relations and alliances with the Shias as well as with Jewish groups in Lebanon, is that's quite the accomplishment. So to have figures like that taken out, it reminds you a little bit of what happened in Syria as well, where you had really unprecedented levels of cooperation and respect for each other's cultures with the coexistence of Orthodox Christian and Muslim worlds, or in Iran, where you have the world's second biggest Jewish community outside of Israel living in relatively peaceful harmony with the Muslim majority, in Iran. So this is the sort of thing that geopoliticians of the West hate, what I mean is, I mean people who are really indoctrinated with the belief of Zbigniew Brzezinski or Sir Bernard Lewis, who have enforced the view that there must be a clash of civilizations, that's our natural state of existence, is fighting each against all amongst cultures. And with that sort of Pygmalion effect, they're like, well, if humanity doesn't do that, we're going to do everything possible to make sure that we can trigger enough explosions and fund enough radical movements within various religions of the world so that we can actually get them to fight and then prove our theory is true, which we then teach in Cambridge and Oxford and Harvard and all of the Western young kids going through our indoctrination program to say, oh yeah, look, that's what humanity is. That's what religion is. It's natural state, right?
Right.
So, yeah, I mean, I alluded to the BRI, the Belt and Road Initiative. A point of jump off that I think is useful is that last year in March 2019, there was a giant delegation of Chinese statesmen, people from the private sector who all came to Lebanon. They had a conference on the BRI, and they put out a series of major programs for building modern railway connections from coastal cities of the north, from the ports of Tripoli via Beirut to Nakora in the south. You had the programs for new power plants, 3 new power plants of 700 megawatts each to be built by China. Giant tunnels connecting east to west with highways. The Beirut to Damascus. This is through Syria all the way to China, which would involve Iran, Iraq connections. That's an element of what was put out there. And the Hezbollah is an actual elected political party that's part of the coalition government. It's not just some extremist organization that the U.S. State Department has it as. This is a group which is, they have a strong alliance with Iran, and the head, Hassan Nasrallah, has been saying go east now for about a year and a bit. And he's called for, most vocally at least. I mean, President Ayoun has also said something very similar, but as the president, he's been a little bit more careful in his wording. But Nasrallah has said that Lebanon has to break free of the IMF and World Bank clutches and go with the new Silk Road. He's going to give several speeches, including on June 17th, 2020, he gave his loudest speech. Back when the Chinese delegations originally came with their offerings to incorporate Lebanon into the Belt and Road, there was a lot of support, but at the time you had, what's his name? Said al-Hariri, who is the president at the time, and who was a complete IMF banker's boy. He had very little sovereignty in his attitude on things, and he chose instead to say no and accepted instead an alternative offer that was made by the IMF for a $10 billion loan to Lebanon, which, they said, oh, we're going to build all of this infrastructure with your loan. But, of course, it comes with conditionalities, and not a single element of infrastructure was ever built with any of that money. And instead, what you had was just austerity, more privatizations of what little state enterprises still existed in Lebanon, which is the way this game has been played now for 50 years. The results of these policies that have been going on now for decades, which is the real debt diplomacy. I mean, Pompeo blames China for debt diplomacy. The U.S. and London.
The U.S. They're the masters of it.
They are. They've been holding this alert since World War II and the death of Roosevelt. Lebanon has really suffered heavily. I mean, it's going through one of the biggest recessions in its history. Its debt levels are 170% of their GDP. You got to keep in mind as well, there's 1.5 million refugees from Syria in Lebanon, which is another huge strain. Lebanon only has 5 million citizens. And what's made this even worse in the last couple of weeks has been that the U.S. has imposed the Caesar Syrian Protection Sanctions Act onto Syria, which is their neighbor. This is a 90% of Syria's exports, which are obviously they're very reduced now with the sanctions, but they go through Lebanon. So Lebanon is now being told, well, if you do any business with Syria, you're going to be sanctioned. And they can't even afford, if everything was perfect right now, they still would be in such a position that they couldn't accept those types of conditions. So they're being put between a rock and a hard place.
And also, Matt, real quick, some of that Syrian imports that were going into Lebanon were also being sold out to the rest of the markets of the world, utilizing that Lebanese port that just blew up as well.
That's right. Yeah, and that was one of the key ports from products that, especially if you keep the mapping of what China's program ultimately is for the new Silk Road, it's not just straight from China through Iran, Turkey, and into Europe. There's a big chunk of that, a big portion of that goes straight through Iraq, again through Iran, into Syria and into Lebanon, with ports of Tripoli and Latakia, as well as in there's a few others. These ports then go straight to the Mediterranean, and that has all sorts of branch off points as well. And then other overland aspects involve going from Lebanon down south through Jordan and around to Egypt, whereby it then can connect into either, we have African connections that could then bridge a lot of what China's already doing in Africa. We could speak a little bit more about this after, but all this to say, it's called a pearl in the Silk Road, these ports. Very important stuff, more important than people realize geopolitically. China has been really, really intense. And at the same time that they made these offers, again, March 2019, the Chinese delegation comes in. That's also the month that Pompeo chooses to go down to Lebanon to counteract the China offer with a threat, pretty much. I got this quote that I found of Pompeo from his speech in Lebanon saying, Lebanon and the Lebanese people, hypocrisy this, face a choice. Bravely move forward as an independent and proud nation, or allow the dark ambitions of Iran and Hezbollah to dictate your future. This
guy is a pompous idiot.
Oh my God.
Every time he opens his mouth, like the whole Nixon thing. Think about it. That speech that he gave at Nixon's estate. Nixon, the guy who was an ardent opponent of the deep state, the guy who helped open up the Chinese market, right? And he goes out there and gives one of the most heinous, vitriolic, idiotic speeches I've ever heard in my mouth. I'm like, there is no doubt that this pompous Pompeo has not only visions of grandeur, he is literally consolidated the idea of him being a possible future presidential candidate. This guy's he's out of his gourd, Matt.
Mm-hmm. I'm just reminded of his the one time where I did see him speak in an honest way was that it's gone viral now, but that clip where he's describing the CIA when he was directing, we just, we lied, we cheated, we were told. No, he said, we were told America was founded upon truth and honesty, and he's like, no, we lied, we cheated, we stole, we made a training manual out of it.
And he was laughing the whole time he said it.
As if it's a mark of pride.
No, it literally is, and he was laughing about it, and the same cackling laughter that you would find in a Hillary Clinton, you could find it in pompous Pompeo with such gloating, with such pride. This guy is deranged. Look at Bolton. Look at Bolton's speech this past week over at where it was, but the same thing. Literally, these guys are nuts. They're crazy.
Yeah. No, I think that's important to keep that in mind, that people think we give the deep state sometimes too much credit for being sort of like evil geniuses, but
no, they're not. They're evil idiots.
Yeah. With a lot of power at their disposal, which makes them that much more dangerous. It's something to laugh at. Right. If somebody, who doesn't have political power, you'd laugh at them. And people like that should probably work maybe at best, serving fast food. To put them into a position of political power and intelligence power, that's not good. And one of his key allies is the guy David Schenker, he's the Assistant Secretary of State for Eastern Affairs.
Oh God!
Schenker has been active in Lebanon. He, as soon as Nasrallah made his Lebanon Go East speech and started really calling for that, and the population has been really, really responsive to the China approach. Schenker came out and he gave a press conference on June 23rd, which is not even, just a few weeks ago.
Yeah.
And he basically said that Lebanon has to go through a complete overhaul in its governing structures. Both him and Pompeo and the whole deep state have wanted to finalize what the Cedar Revolution in 2005, which was really just, when you look at what was behind this, it was a National Endowment for Democracy, Open Society, Color Revolution in 2005. Though it had legitimate grievances, as all color revolutions do, it was completely Western manipulated for the most part. But a lot of it didn't work out the way that they wanted when Aoun came in, and Aoun broke with their strategy for what they wanted Lebanon to be. And Aoun made a lot of enemies with the U.S. State Department of George Bush, who basically called him unmanageable, uncooperative. He broke with the March 14th alliance, and started.
They couldn't call him a fundamentalist Islamic terrorist because he was Christian, so that didn't work.
He made it really tough to typecast. But so these guys, what they want to do is really finalize what they didn't get to have done back then, and they want Hezbollah out. They want that gone. Now, as a political party, as a major part of Lebanon, you can't dissolve Lebanon. Even if you got this perfect State Department tool, you couldn't get rid of Hezbollah without having Lebanon fall into civil war again. And they know it. That's kind of what they want. And Shanker said, Lebanon needs to avoid falling into China's debt trap. And he said, looking east is shocking, in his words.
Jesus Christ.
He said, does Lebanon want to have what happened? Does Lebanon want to have happen to them what Africa, he names Djibouti, and Pakistan happened to them? It's like, well, wait a minute. Did you actually look at what's been happening to Africa or Pakistan under the CPEC or Djibouti since China has actually invested billions in ports and put 200,000 people to work, created an engineering culture in Djibouti. Yep. And rail connecting to Ethiopia and look at Pakistan. We could talk about some of the fallacies of the whole debt trap, but he goes off and attacks this. And I think, again, if it was just Lebanon, they would have a lot more points of control. However, it's not just Lebanon. It's that China is in the middle of finalizing, and I think a lot of these chaotic events from the UAE, that happened in Iran and Lebanon, have a lot to do with China's finalization of a security and economic partnership deal with Iran, which has been, as we know, there's been a huge effort to suffocate Iran in sanctions. Right. And China, there's a $400 billion deal now that is on the verge of being finalized, as well as a different deal with Russia and Iran to extend a 20-year security and economic partnership with Russia, which expires in March 2021. They're now finalizing the extension of it for an additional 20 years. Both of these things are vitally important to understand, because if they can Iran is the key node. Historically, it was always part of the Silk Road, as was Syria and places like Aleppo. That was true 2,000 years ago. It's true today. And basically what China is offering is they are offering infrastructure. That's what they offer to everybody. That's what they can do. And Iran is hungry for this. And this includes high-speed rail connections. Iran only has a little high-speed rail, still more than Canada, which has 0. And I think even more than the US at this point. But they're actually offering a broad high-speed rail program, new highway systems. Russia is offering to help Iran build the uncompleted nuclear power plant, as well as other nuclear power plants that need to be built. There were 2 that were nearly finalized in 1979. And when the revolution happened, all of these were shut down. One was 80% done, one was 50% done. They were all canceled after the original revolution. And it was only in the 90s that one of them, that Russia started helping to complete one, and now the other, which has just been sitting there, offering abundant, cheap energy for the people, can now be done. So also there's it's, I think, really recognized that Iran, just as many other Muslim countries, is very interested in Russia's S-400 anti-aircraft or just defense system in general.
Wait a minute, Matt.
Yeah.
Doesn't the S-400, can it see the F-35 invisible, stealth airplane?
Yeah, the F-35 is a joke.
It's a flying turd, man. It really is a flying turd. Oh my God! You realize it's the function, the greater function of the U.S. military is not to really win wars anymore. It is to keep the propaganda going. So you have a willing civilian population duped into thinking that we can go ahead and meddle and do whatever we want in the world, and there's no repercussions or ramifications. It's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. Oh my God.
Yeah. And also THAAD. I mean, like the U.S. has put a lot of effort into building up the THAAD missile systems in South Korea and elsewhere. And I mean, this whole system would be rendered effectively obsolete if the S-400 is completed across Asia to Turkey. Turkey's also installing the S-400s as well. It's not just Iran. UAE, which, as we noted, it went through its own explosion, is also implementing the S-400s. Hell, even Saudi Arabia, which has increasingly seen a bit of a change of its own character in the last couple of years towards a receptivity to Belt and Road ideas, has also expressed a very big interest in doing this. So, you have a major struggle between these two systems. In exchange, I didn't mention, but yeah, what China will be getting will be what they need, essentially minerals and oil. That's what Iran has. And people say to Iran, well, why do they want nuclear power? They obviously want an Islamic bomb, don't they? Like,
yes, they want
oil. Why would they use the oil that they have? And it's like, well, if you think about how oil has been used geopolitically to crush nations and keep them, like if the valuation of oil is just the open spot markets, which are this is purely shaped by speculative interest of people sitting in Wall Street who don't really, or the city, who don't really care about the oil. They just look at numbers and they want to maximize their profits. So the prices are fluctuating dramatically with no regard for supply, demand, for the actual cost of production or consumption.
Correct.
Those real standards don't matter in terms of how oil prices are measured, and who suffers. It's the people who need the oil to purchase it, to use it, who need to sell it, whose economies rely on its export. They're the ones who suffer, and nations are brought to kneel. So yeah, of course, countries who have a lot of oil would also want to have sovereignty of their energy policy with nuclear power, which is, it's very hard to manipulate the price of energy when you have nuclear power. A power plant's good for 40 to 60 years, even longer if you refurbish it. And that uranium is going to be good for quite a while, or thorium, or whatever else that you want to use. So everyone just screams Islamic bomb. And
that's what it is, because they've dumbed down the population to the point where they know the average basal level Joe Sixpack on the street who has a 6th grade reading level is going to equate mentally. He's going to make that mental equivalency between nuclear power plant and nuclear bomb, not realizing that the monumental task of converting a nuclear power plant and the materials from that into an actual feasible material to create a bomb is a gigantic process in and of itself. They don't seem to understand that Iran right now is floating on possibly the largest oil reserve in the world, and they have zero refining capacity in order to do it. In other words, they need the current electrical infrastructure is not enough in order for them to get that refining capacity up to get their oil into the market. So they are pigeonholed. Nuclear power for the Iranians means elevation into the next level of economic development. It means making them a straight up economic and energy powerhouse on the global scale, and a absolute rival to the machinations of the City of London Corporation and Wall Street in regards to Middle East, in regards to Saudi Arabia, in regards to Israel, and they can't have that.
Yes, absolutely. And the quality of minds you need from your population. If you have a nuclear based society and economic system, you need to have people who are super smart, very well-trained people who can understand how do you not only operate a plant, which is not like a coal plant, or it's not like a windmill farm where you just need the level of education of a squeegee to keep them clean. You need to have really smart people, to not only build, to maintain, but also to understand the science, the physics behind the atom. And this is a domain where there's a lot of danger because there's so much we don't know about the structure of electron orbitals and of what's going on in terms of the geometry within the nucleus. What allows for this transformation of of matter to energy that we then concentrate in our current state of civilization, still use it to ultimately boil water to create steam to run turbines, which is not that different from a gas or coal plant in terms of the mechanics of it. But in terms of the science of it, we are confronting, our minds are immediately pushing on the frontiers of the unknown, which is where great discoveries are always made. So I think the oligarchy, which its focus has always been primarily on mind and how human knowledge has to be kept in a sort of straitjacket of formulas that are accepted by a high priesthood in Cambridge or where, elsewhere.
Right.
And that way, by just memorizing formulas and by imposing that mapping of formula onto the universe, be it through the Copenhagen interpretation of statistical probability or whatever, and just say it's all just chaos, it's all just random. I don't have to think about the atom anymore or galaxy formation anymore. Its nature is statistical random probability. You turn the mind off behind this wall of complexity. No, but when you really push on something like nuclear power, you have people in particle physics who are actually trying to figure things out and use creativity. The danger is that they make discoveries, and then those discoveries, as we've seen with Einstein, Max Planck, Kepler, all the way back throughout history, those discoveries then render obsolete all of the monopolized formulas that the empire has relied upon to keep society within a very limited sphere of action, highly controlled, it's like a mental cage, or what Aldous Huxley called the concentration camp without tears in the mind, right? It's not physical. So that's really what the oligarchy is afraid of when they look ultimately. I mean, they're afraid of the power and the sovereignty that nuclear power gives an African or Middle Eastern or any country, but they're really afraid of that awakening of the scientific creative powers within.
Can't have it. That can't happen. That's why you keep college kids, distracted with gender studies and race studies and gay art therapy and feeling and coloring book. I mean, seriously, man. I mean, this is what you do. So you have a generation of kids who are not only entitled but at the same time feel victimized. How's that possible? This is what Orwell talked about. Doublethink, and this is doublethink. I am entitled, but at the same time, I'm a victim. It's craziness. Yeah.
What I've always liked is this paradox that, we're at 7.8 billion people. You could say that statistically we are producing the greatest quantity of PhDs at any time in history, proportionally in terms of the whole population. And yet the rate of collapse of civilization, both culturally and economically, has never happened at a faster rate either. Like the lack of ability to think about solutions has never been lower in so many ways than it is in the Western world, which goes through 4 to 10 years of indoctrination to get your degrees and then go out into the workforce to put your ideas that you've learned into action, whether it's on Wall Street or whether it's in academia or whether it's in science in general. And there are exceptions, no doubt, people who think in spite of their what they went through in a lot of the universities, and there's good teachers in there too, but those are outliers. Overall, the rate of collapse is just astoundingly bad. So what's really going on? What's the problem? And this is where I think we really have to get into epistemological warfare. And this is why I started this whole discussion. I thought it was nice that we started with a question of how the mind thinks versus what is being thought about, because how you think is more important than the predicates that are thrown at you. And you can have all of the right facts in front of your eyes, and you could have the right opinions, but if your mind doesn't organize itself or hasn't trained itself to think, okay, what is the cause for the arrangement of these facts? What is the cause of a formula I'm being fed? I know it seems to work, but what caused it? What idea discovery caused that formula to come into being? Because at some point it wasn't a formula, right? Before Pythagoras discovered the nature of this hypotenuse in relation to the sides of a triangle, a right angle triangle. That wasn't a formula that could be used by anybody. So what was really going on physically that his mind was grappling with that allowed his solution concept to come into being, that we then call the formula symbolically and then transplanted generation to generation? If you don't think that way, you're always going to kind of be a tool for somebody else's ideas in some way. You won't be fully sovereign unless you start, and you'll never know everything, but you got to train yourself to start asking those questions. Whose interest? What is the dynamic? And I think, the debt trap diplomacy is a big one. And a lot of really good people I know people who like Trump, for the right reasons at least, they also fall into this belief that China is actually a new empire.
It's a new empire. They're communists.
They're communist. Yeah, exactly. Communist Party of China. And yeah, sure,
Matt, let's take a sledgehammer. Let's take a sledgehammer to the talking point that about the debt trap, and that African countries are being recolonized and they're being put into debt traps and stuff. Let's take a sledgehammer to that, man. Let's kill it right here, right now, so people that are listening in could be educated and they can repeat this. Go ahead, Matty.
Sure, absolutely. Well, I think I'm just going to pull up a little slide, and I wish I had the ability to show these things on your program.
Oh, you could just
I can't. The other computer, I didn't prepare myself properly. So
no problem. If you want to share something, just hit the share screen on the
bottom. I didn't know we could do that. Okay, our next interview, I'm going to be prepared to show some images.
No problem.
What I have in front of me here is two graphs, and I really highly encourage people to use some of the research by an analyst who I think is just a gold standard, Hussein Askari. He has he works at the Schiller Institute. He's in Sweden, and he has I
don't know about him. That sounds like an Islamic name to me, man. I don't think I could trust him.
Check it out. He's Swedish. It's okay. No, he's actually of Iraqi origin, and he is just an extraordinary mind. He runs a think tank in Sweden called BRICS Sweden, which has wonderful reports, and his analysis on the debt trap is extraordinarily good. There's a graph that he published in one debunking the Chinese debt trap, where he just goes through Africa as a case study, and he goes through two pie charts showing there's very similar quantities of money being invested by Chinese private and public, both the Import-Export Bank as well as private sector and public, compared to the U.S. through the World Bank, the IMF, and U.S. aid. There's very similar quantities of money, but then they looked at, well, what about the quality of where the money's going? How is it being used in both cases? And both pie charts really get at this nicely, where in both cases, mining exists, services exist, but that's where it pretty much ends. So in China's case, they've got 28% of their investments are going into mining. They need mining. China does, they've got a lot of people. They require development. They need minerals and resources. Mining is a big one. Africa has a lot of it. Okay, 28% of China's investments, mining. US, 66%. That's the vast majority. Holding companies, which are highly used for laundering money, black ops.
Yep.
In the US case, it's 14% of their investments. Holding companies. In China's case, none are going to holding companies. China, however, has 27% of their investments going into construction of infrastructure, hospitals, schools, water treatment, rail and roads. That is very important because, obviously, I don't have to say because. In the US case, construction, I'm looking for it on the pie chart, it doesn't exist. There's no construction going on in the US case anywhere in their investments in terms of infrastructure. China, financial services, which involve allowing Africa, investing in African banks in Nigeria, in Kenya. China's actually building a means for them to have an actual banking structure in Africa. In the US case, nothing, not a single, that's not permitted. So none of that is going on. There is services for the US. Some of this involves, painting rocks and stuff that go to Western dollar stores as part of, little microcredit programs. That doesn't really help nations. And manufacturing is 7% in China. What type of manufacturing? That's dubious. In China's case, it's 13% and growing at a hyperbolic rate. So in China's case, they're being blamed for going in with Chinese firms to build things. And
you have to. But they're turning around and training the population. I've seen the videos. I've seen the reports out, from people that are like, yeah, I'm an engineer now. Oh, we're setting up engineering schools in the middle of Nigeria, and people are being brought in there. They're being trained on mathematics and sciences and all. Why the hell we're supposed to be the indispensable nation?
Mm-hmm.
We're the indispensable nation, Mathew, but yet we're not doing jack squat. What's our answer to China? What's our answer to African development? Oh, yes, that's right. AFRICOM. That's our answer.
Yeah, right. extend the U.S. military into Africa. I just wrote down here, the case of Nigeria is completely tragic. Where you look at I had my stat here. I forgot. Okay, but Nigeria has suffered from IMF loans now for decades, and their debt repayment is something like half of their GDP to just service their debts.
Crazy.
It's the same thing for Pakistan. Look, if you want to attack Pakistan for falling into a China debt trap with the China-Pakistan economic corridor. Their debts are 90% of their debts are incurred from the IMF. They're not owed to China. Their creditors are the Paris Club. They're members of the IMF and World Bank that control it. And if you look at their debt servicing ratios, it's crazy. It's $95 billion Pakistan, US, $31 billion to debt servicing alone. In 2020, $4 billion is being put into debt, and it's accumulating, because then what happens is if they're short on a payment or they're running behind on any of their conditionalities, then they get penalized, which then adds more to their debt. This is the same case for Djibouti, for all the countries, for Sri Lanka. Sorry, that's my cat learning how to jump into a pot. Sri Lanka is one of the biggest, most repeated cases of China debt trap, with the port that China has built there, and was the port of Hambantota, where they're saying, look, China just built it. They tricked them, and now China owns the port for 90 or plus years. There's more to it. I mean, that Sri Lanka was in total debt before China had any economic relations with Sri Lanka. They were already a debt slave. These ratios that you're seeing of Sri Lankan debt is not new. What China started doing in 2007, when they started building this port, is it was built on an assumed growth model based on traffic, and it's just like 7 kilometers or 7 nautical miles away from Sri Lanka, from that port, that you have one of the biggest maritime shipping centers of the world. So of course, that looked like a pretty smart place to build a major port that would then translate into a lot of revenue non-linearly for Sri Lanka. There's a multiplier effect, obviously, when you have a lot of traffic coming through a port. And also rail. China's been not just building that port, they built a lot of rail around Sri Lanka and roads connecting to other countries in the Asian region, as well as industrial sectors. So it's not just that port, right? There's a whole integrated view, and that model, after the port was built, didn't work out because the forecasted activity on the port didn't work out that way. There was a highly reduced amount of activity for various geopolitical reasons. And they were in bankruptcy, and they had to pay. They were being told by the IMF and World Bank and Paris Club creditors that you have to pay up your annual dues, and you need your U.S. Reserves to be full to certain ratios in order to maintain your debt repayments. And they didn't have those. They couldn't suffer more penalizations. So China came in with the offer of taking ownership or leasing it with controls, 80% of it for a certain amount of period, with the obligation, I must add, to maintain and upgrade that port with over $1 billion of investment. That was a state-run company. So that comes with it too. Now, yes, okay, China has a controlling stake in it for a long time, but it's not just that port. At this point, Sri Lanka has now a completely new upshifted rate of economic growth because of not just the port, but the whole complex of development that China has helped them with, which can now allow them to actually honor those Western obligations. The amount of debt that China is owed to China is minuscule relative to what's owed to the IMF, and the difference is China builds things, the West does not.
No, so, the West exploits.
Exactly.
This is why the people of the West need to wake the hell up. They need to return their visions and really target it on who their leaders are, who are they serving, who are the puppet masters that are behind the curtain, because these guys who've exploited the world for so long, and now it's being, that exploitation is slowed down quite a bit because of the eruption of the multipolar world on the stage. And now what's happening is that they have turned their gun sights onto the population of the West. And the final wealth extraction is that the West is the leaders that are in the city of London and Wall Street are cannibalizing us. They're cannibalizing us. The chickens are coming home to roost now, Mathew. Absolutely. Austerity is coming.
Yeah. Well, that's always been what the bankers have done, right? Is that, and not all bankers are bad, but I'm saying that the financial oligarchy, I should say, maybe to be more clear, is that they get you to worship money and to think that money is the metric for economic health and wealth, so that you stop looking at the physical standards that your mind would naturally look at when judging a nation's health, which is like, well, how are the people's lives improving? Like, do they have access to healthcare? Do they have access to food? How's that going? People don't spend that much time thinking about those things as they used to when they think about money or they think about economics. So, when it comes to then becoming healthy, look at Greece or any of the other countries that have accepted the IMF doctors like Lagarde, who have wanted to bring them back into health. It's really just been privatize everything you have if you haven't done that already, and for whatever else you need to do, austerity, like cut the budget in healthcare and other things, that social safety nets that can then save you money that you can then give to those same oligarchs who created the models that you then applied to begin with to get yourself into this type of bankruptcy. And then along the way, I mean, there's been a nice little dose of corruption created along the way to make sure to grease the wheels and to make sure that an elite local control strata of criminals increasingly become embedded in the controlling architecture of whatever target nation you want. And that's the way it goes. I think that the case, though, again, of just looking at the Middle East is so useful because it's been so destroyed now for so long and abused. And then to have things like Syria seeing that the 4C vision, or actually it's now 5C vision, is having a chance to re-blossom and take discussion. Have you heard of the 5C vision of Bashar al-Assad?
I've heard of that. If you briefly, I've heard of it. I didn't get a chance to deep dive into it, but if you could break it down for us, Mathew, that'll be awesome.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, Lebanon plays a role into this, and I mean, this is now increasingly becoming part of the discussion for reconstruction. It plays in. This was first proposed in 2004 when Syria was still an occupying force of Lebanon. Remember, they only left after the Cedar Revolution in 2005. That was sparked with the assassination of Hariri, Prime Minister Hariri. His father was also prime minister and was assassinated. And that sort of sparked something that had been planned for over a year before that, since 2003, 2004. And again, there's stuff that's been written on this regarding the National Endowment for Democracy, the CIA front operations for Color Revolution, that we then saw applied later on to the Euromaidan, to the Arab Spring and other things. I mean, it's been done so many times. Hong Kong was another. But so the 5C vision. This was originally put out in 2004.
Wait, I remember now. This is that whole where he wanted to be able to utilize Syria as a hub for the Mediterranean, the Black Sea, the Caspian, and the Red Sea.
Yeah, exactly. The Black Sea, Persian Gulf, Caspian, Mediterranean, and the Indian Ocean was the.
Oh yes.
I think the Red Sea would be a later phase of this. If you can get that done, then because the Red Sea, you have to deal with Israel and other
How
things.
dare they? How dare they imagine such projects?
Yeah.
How dare they try to ascend themselves, Mathew? How dare they?
Well, what's so interesting is that when I looked into this thing, and again, Hussein Askari wrote a really good piece called Project Phoenix, which people can Google that and check it out. A video was made about this that I embedded in my my recent article on the Middle East new post-regime change future that I sent you, and maybe you could put it in the description box of this video. But yeah, essentially, Bashar al-Assad not only put out this program for connecting all of these zones from Iran, Iraq, and all the way through Turkey to connect all of these big water projects, not water projects, these zones of seas and of oceans through development corridors. But he actually went to all of these various countries and organized like hell. He got 7 countries who would be participating in this bloc to sign pacts to make this happen, leading up until 2009. So, and actually 2010 is when the Turkey signed on, Azerbaijan. I mean, there's a whole list of these. So this was coming really close to happening, and people underestimate this. So this was also happening around the same time, from 2004 to 2011. This is when the major acceleration of this program was happening. What was happening in Libya, right?
Yeah, yep. That's when the State Department. Well, you said 2009, right?
Well, 2009, exactly.
Right.
So Libya in 2009, that's when you had the Great Man-Made Water Project.
Right, correct. Gaddafi was on a tear with infrastructure development projects. He was really elevating his country. He started really talking and discussing and trying to push out there the gold-backed dinar. Everything that would give a Western bankster nightmares. And they couldn't have Gaddafi all of a sudden magically link up with al-Assad. God forbid, with that and China in the background and then Iran, forget it. It's a nightmare scenario for these idiots.
Oh, yeah. And Libya wasn't doing this completely solo either. They had a whole block worked out with Egypt's Mubarak as well as President Bashir of Sudan. Ethiopia had a certain play in that as well.
Cue the Arab Spring.
Cue the Arab Spring, exactly. And cue Susan Rice, jumping into Sudan with her project to cut it up into the north and south. For more divide and conquer discord, right?
Sickening, man. Sickening.
Totally sickening. So all of this was the natural flow before the Arab Spring. And at the time, China and Russia had not gotten enough, they hadn't built themselves up enough to properly challenge this agenda. So they had to they had to let it happen. The Belt and Road hadn't existed yet. So this is what is now being revived with China's offers to offer reconstruction measures for the Middle East. It involves rail corridors that could feasibly connect, like I said, a north-south, because the Belt and Road, which involves a land and sea-based component, would have an offshoot that would go all the way to the ports in Syria as well as the ports of Lebanon. And I don't think that Israel, under its current leadership, would play a very positive role in a lot of this. A lot of this would happen in spite of Mossad and Israeli activities. For now, I mean, I'm not saying that it's impossible that they couldn't get a change in orientation, because we know that Israel does have. If you look at people like Yitzhak Rabin, the former prime minister who organized the Oslo Accords, the two-state solution policy in 1992 with Yasser Arafat. There are a lot of followers of his orientation in Israel. It's not just the Bibi Jabotinskyites who believe in greater Israel. It's not just them. They actually were, it's just that Israel has such a complex, there's so many political parties that, if you only have, 18, 20, 19% of the vote, like Bibi, you can still be the prime minister, because there's 30 other parties. But all that to say, right now, probably the development corridors would probably go down around Jordan, which would be much more in harmony with this policy for now, and then into Egypt, where Egypt is struggling itself as well, but their leader is also a fan of big infrastructure, a fan of working with China. They've signed Belt and Road cooperative policies. These things would all work out, but it really does require, though, that you have a recognition from the West that the financial system and the military system that are all interconnected is not going to last. And either we're going to have a nuclear war, because you do have these hawks like Pompeo and Schenker and others, and Bolton, who luckily has been fired, who are gunning for a full-blown war with China and Russia if they can.
Crazy.
Yeah, they're nuts, and they want absolute submission, which they will never get. So that's one path that we can take. And if you don't think constructively, because people are like, oh, it'll never happen. That's their a lot of people's fallback position is, oh, it'll never happen. It's too corrupt here. It would be nice, but never will. It's like, okay, think about the implications of what you've just said, because if that's true, then you're dead and your families really don't have much of a future, because that's nuclear war and economic hell. For the survivors. I mean, like JFK said, the survivors are going to envy the dead under the conditions of a nuclear war.
Yep.
So really think about your choice to do nothing and to be a cynic. Trump, I think, by looking at his track record, he says a lot of dumb things that are disappointing, but at the same time, he has consistently show through his actions, and in some cases his words, but his actions mean more in my mind than anything else, that he is not at one with the deep state in any way, including within his own party.
Right.
We saw it through his firing of Bannon, of Bolton, of many people in the State Department. We've seen that with the ongoing war for the past 4 years to undo the 2016 elections with Russiagate, Robert Mueller, the entire CIA, FBI apparatus, which, as truths keep on coming out, it seems, every week, and we find that the guiding hand of MI6, people like Christopher Steele, Sir Richard Dearlove, the former head of MI6 that gave us the dodgy dossier of 2001-2 that proved Iraq had yellow cake, that, all of these figures have always been behind the dodgy dossier to run a coup in the United States. So this has a certain British pedigree. And I'm going to get back to my point, but first, as I'm digressing, let me digress one step further, because this week there was new revelations of Brookings Institute and Strobe Talbot. I don't know if you've heard about this and their role behind Russiagate and Christopher Steele.
No, I haven't heard this.
It's interesting, but basically, the Brookings Institute is more active. It's basically a left-wing, primarily think tank, but it has people like Victoria Nuland, her husband, are senior fellows in it. Strobe Talbot, who's the former Assistant Secretary of State under Clinton and the major controller of the machine, he ran it until 2017. But this thing had direct connections all the way back to 2006 with Fiona Hill, and the figure that just was revealed to be Christopher Steele's main source for his dodgy dossier to prove Russian collusion with the United States and what they had on Trump, prostitutes peeing on him and stuff, or vice versa. I forget. All of this.
What happened? It was actually Christopher Steele who was in a Russian hotel being peed on by God knows who.
Right, that was real projection there.
That's real projection. Real projection. How do I clear my name? Right. Donald Trump. Yes, Donald Trump was being peed on by Russian prostitutes. This way I'll cover for these two young men who are peeing on me. Okay.
Yeah, right. To be a method actor in intelligence, that's
all they are, man. That's all they are. These are the most brain-dead, brain-rotted idiots that are devoid of any sort of real critical or strategic thinking. There's been such a when I read on most of these guys, or if I've met a handful of these idiots who are working in State Department offices and or intelligence operations, they are not smart. I've never been so unimpressed in my life, Mathew. I've never been so unimpressed. I think the deep state and the cabal 50 years ago, now those guys got things done.
No, absolutely. Yeah, you look at the caliber of thinking of a Henry Kissinger or some of these old school H.G. Wells, Bertrand Russell. You look at their writing, the quality of thinking that was going on there, and then you compare it to like Strobe Talbot or Dearlove or Steele, and it's such.
Oh my God, it's gone off a cliff.
Oh yeah, but my point here. So my point to continue my digression before we get back to Trump is that Steele's. It was revealed finally who his main source was to the public. It was already known from the beginning who this was because the FBI interrogated him. But it was a Russian-born analyst with Brookings Institute who worked there for years and was a protege of Fiona Hill, who later became one of the people who testified against Trump for the impeachment hearings, who was sent to work at the NSC by Strobe Talbot. But this young guy, Igor, I can't pronounce the last name off the top of my memory, but this young guy was really just a fuck up. Multiple arrests for drunken, being violent and drunk in public settings and stuff. And one of the key guys was basically, okay, so he was a fuck up his pretty much whole life. He co-authored papers with Fiona Hill. He admitted to the FBI in January 2017 when he was asked, like, why do you think that Christopher Steele approached and hired you to pull together the information for his dodgy dossier? He's like, I don't know. I don't know, but I had to come up with facts because I needed money. So he pretty much just had a bunch of drinking. He had nobody near the Kremlin, nobody in Moscow even, who gave him that intel. It was really just drinking buddies. that gave him information, including one of his ex-girlfriends who had no connection to anything in Russia. That then became the thing that gave birth to.
So basically, some perverted kid who has some golden shower fetishes has come up with this whole thing.
Yeah, pretty much. and so, with the Brookings thing, people have often said, or have increasingly said, okay, this proves the Democratic Party is at the heart of this thing. And it's like, well, not really, because if you look at who controls the bookings, so if you look at Strobe Talbot, he's a Rhodes Scholar. He flooded the White House with dozens of other Rhodes Scholars when Bill Clinton, another Rhodes Scholar who was his roommate in Oxford, took power in 1992. As a Rhodes Scholar, if you really look into what this is as a phenomenon of the 20th and 21st century, this is a British intelligence operation where they just indoctrinate talented young people from around the world in a specific Oxford run training program, which is an intelligence operation. And then for they measure you along the way. There's 32 American Rhodes Scholars who are given these scholarships every year to be brainwashed. And for those who pass certain tests, they filter and categorize them out and then deploy them back into whatever country they come from to advance a certain, unipolar agenda, which, some of them maybe don't have the stomach for it and they're given lower level tasks. Some of them are not given the full picture because maybe they're too in touch with their morality after their 2 to 4 year Oxford experience. Other ones are given more responsibility, like, Canada's Deputy Prime Minister, Chrystia Freeland is an example, right? All that to say, this thing, if you look at what Cecil Rhodes did in before he died with his will and testaments in establishing the Rhodes Trust, it was literally to create a new British Empire because the British Empire was on a descent. It was everyone knew in the end of the 19th century that the British Empire was going to collapse pretty soon. They had overextended themselves. People had come to be aware of their methods and the evil that ran this global system. From India, China's opium wars, their suppression of Indian rebellion movements, to their role in breaking up the Union of America by sponsoring the Confederacy and the slave power in the South. That was a complete British operation, which couldn't have happened had it not been for British Canada, which was a Confederacy intelligence hub in Toronto and Montreal and Nova Scotia. Which is where, if you look at Wilkes Booth and where he was deployed from to carry out the assassination of Lincoln, it was from Montreal, Canada. I've written a lot about this on the Canadian Patriot.org website. But all that to say, the world had come to know. Also, Russia came to understand what they were with Britain and France together orchestrated the Crimean Wars, that near total destruction of Russia. Right. And that was why Russia woke up with the United States that had been victimized by decades in America of British-run presidents, with especially, this got really bad with Andrew Jackson and Martin Van Buren, who were always run by the Aaron Burr city of London apparatus in America. But it continued all the way to Lincoln, where the power of the slave institutions grew and grew, and the power of America's constitutional institutions were reduced to shambles. So Russia came in, saved America at a certain point of crisis in 1863 by deploying their naval ships. This is all part of the sale of Alaska in 1867 to America. Right. Russia formerly owned it. This was always done with the intention to bring in development, especially rail development, to create new cities, new development corridors, where Lincoln's Transcontinental was being finished by 1869. It was begun in the middle of the Civil War. The world's first transcontinental rail, funded by productive credit, to connect a country inland so that it would no longer be reliant on maritime shipping, which was monopolized by the British. It was an empire of the sea and of the banks. So the idea was always to extend Lincoln's rail into British Columbia, which its name should have probably have changed at and through Alaska and into Russia. The Russian Trans-Siberian Railway was entirely modeled exactly on the U.S. Transcontinental. It was even built with trains and rail produced in Philadelphia by the Baldwin locomotive companies. People like Lincoln's advisor, Henry C. Carey, was a big organizer of this. And it was going internationally. Otto von Bismarck's Germany was applying this process as well for the creation of the Zollverein, of the customs union of Germany, to unify Germany the way that America unified itself after the revolution under Hamilton.
Right.
He created a protective tariff saying that, look, all the states have to have a common economic program, common currency, common banking system, so that we can't be divided to be conquered. So that was a customs union of sorts, with free trade working very well internally, but a protective tariff externally around the nation to protect it from British dumping of cheap goods and other things that the British East India Company monopolized. That worked very well. America had grown, it quadrupled its population in its first 40 years. It became a productive hub. Germany wanted to do the same, and they did the same thing. And it was vectored around rail development. It was tied to projects in France under President Sadi Carnot, who wanted to do and did something very similar to break away from the imperial aspect of France. It was done in harmony with Alexander II. And then when he was assassinated, it was continued with Alexander III for industrialization of Russia. Keep in mind, Alexander II he was known as the Great Liberator for freeing the serfs and undoing the oligarchical institutions. It didn't become perfect because the fight continued, just like it did in America, right? Where the Reconstruction was sabotaged by the return of the slave power with Lincoln's death. However, the system was still spreading as the dominant force globally. It was spreading in Japan. In China was being prepared for a revolution under Sun Yat-sen, who had studied Lincoln. So this was understood by all thinking people to be the new multipolar paradigm of the 19th century that was going to replace the unipolar world government, which was always the British Empire. This is before communism versus capitalism was falsely created. That's a whole discussion into itself. But a lot of assassinations were orchestrated, artificial wars, some color revolutions in Russia, and a lot of this became undone. Why am I saying this? I'm just saying this because right now, what we're seeing with the reemergence of this multipolar potential, and to get at your question before about China, communism, capitalism, socialism with Chinese characteristics, like there's so many labels. It's really the process is what America embodied as a national credit system where you have a balance, you have the coexistence of private and government, private enterprise and government processes. So the government is a catalyzer for processes. It's elected and held accountable by people. It has a certain constitutional mandate to follow, upon which if it fails, it should be either people should be impeached or not voted into office. I mean, China, everything is, it was never a final product when 1776 happened, or when 1787 happened, or in 1865, or in 1963, America was never a finished product. It was a process of becoming.
Correct.
And the same thing for China. China went through its own experience. Things are in a state of evolution, of development, but the thing to define it that we're seeing that's defining the multipolar paradigm is the same principle that the U.S. tapped into. When you have, people call it communist, well, explain the mass array of private enterprise and private initiative.
That's just communist. That's the new communist.
Yeah, right. It's like Aoun is the Christians in Lebanon are the new Muslim fundamentalists, right?
Exactly. Christians in Lebanon are the new Islamic fundamentalists, and they need to be in Gitmo.
Yeah, right.
They need some freedom.
It's so hillbilly. Yeah, it's so bad. But so yeah, it's really bad. You have it's the power of the nation state in principle, which has a stronger power in influencing economic processes than the private central bankers in London or their lackeys in Wall Street or anywhere else, right? And it's tied to an idea of value. That value is not located in the money or in the desire people have to purchase whatever, like, gasoline or heroin. Into the mind of somebody who thinks in this way, they're both valuable because people want to spend money on them, and there's a certain supply and demand. So you can say there's value, but it's like, and you can calculate them into your GDP if you want to. And it's like, well, okay, if you want to define value that way, but if you look at, like, does your nation benefit by the spread of heroin? No, I would say people, you're probably suffering quite a bit, like China did in the 19th century, which is why they tried to ban it and had Britain put a war on them to stuff it down their throats, to keep them nice and malleable and easy to exploit. So this is the same thing going on today, and anybody trying to analyze this without that historical context is really going to be missing some steps. Trump, from what I've seen, and I didn't answer what I started on, from what I've seen is that he does represent a strong orientation towards adapting to that multipolar pro-development orientation. He wants to build things. He doesn't seem to really want forever wars, and I could say that because he hasn't started any forever wars in spite of this massive military intelligence complex around him that's been built up for decades and that he's been fighting against ever consistently. Sometimes being forced to go along with it, sometimes being forced to go along with something Israel wants that is unjust. But the point is, there's been a consistent orientation where even in the case of, like, I was reading a CNN or a New York Times attack piece on Trump yesterday, which is it's called 39 Things Trump Has Done to Support Russia. And of course, they're saying an attack on Trump, he says he's tough on Russia and not true. Look at all these things. And it's like, yeah, you look at these things, it looks pretty good. Maybe like Trump a lot more. Because it's like, they said one of the things is he removed U.S. troops from northern Syria to give way for Russian troops to actually fight ISIS in Syria. How terrible! It's like, okay, Obama never would have done that. He was willing to go to war with Russia in Syria, and he actually did bring us very close to that. Trump had the balls to say that, or to say that Russia sees ISIS as much of a threat to them as America sees ISIS as a threat to us. How crude and fallacious is Trump for using Russia's talking points? It's like, what?
These, God forbid, two nuclear hyperpowers should get along. God forbid that, we get along with a country that has a larger nuclear arsenal than us, that has the most powerful nuclear weapon on God's green earth, which is the Sarmat 1 and 2, that could vaporize the state of Texas in one hit. One hit. Texas, bye-bye. France, bye-bye. God forbid we get along and have good relations with that country.
Oh, my God, eh? And I mean, this is
crazy.
So the multipolar alliance that's just merely coming back, it's another chance we have to recapture that missed chance of the 19th century. We've got it again. It's very much in alignment with American true constitutional principles and traditions that have been, there's been a lot of work to destroy our collective memory of who we are. And I say we, I'm Canadian, I know that, but my heart is with this.
Yeah, absolutely. No, we're all the same. We're in the sense of, we flee, we got away from the crown. You guys are, in Canada, they're still trying to, completely, break away from that octopus. But
yeah.
But it's still there, man. I've seen, I traveled to Asia. You've been if you've been to India, you've seen that the residue of British rule is still there. You look at the Congress Party in India. They're basically a bunch of City of London lackeys.
Yes.
So you see this residue through all the Commonwealth countries throughout the world. Absolutely.
Yes. And I mean, it's disintegrating, the ability for the City of London to maintain its international controls is falling as fast as the economic order is collapsing.
Yes, it is.
There's going to be more and more points of openings for people within the Commonwealth of, it's 54 countries that have the Queen as their head of state. But it's not just the Queen, it's really that there's an entire Privy Council, Five Eyes infrastructure, keeping as much as possible all of these countries from the Caribbeans, African countries. India is a part of this, keeping them sort of all within a certain geopolitical orientation. But we're seeing even that break down as members of the Commonwealth are signing on to the Belt and Road framework increasingly. And there's movements in Australia, in New Zealand, in India, as well as in Canada to also join that spirit, because there's no future otherwise. So for sure, this is our collective heritage as a civilization globally, to experience a world devoid of oligarchical controls. There will always be, I think, in my thinking, at least currently, I think you're always going to have problems of empire ambitions. You're going to have problems of corruption. We'll never be angels.
No.
But we can at least adopt a system of political economy that's associated with our true self-interest as a species, which is not to destroy each other or our children. And I think that can be at least attainable. And
right.
we've seen coming out of this open system, anti-entropic orientation, which increasingly has just seen space development to the wazoo. I mean, we have now, when I talk open system, look at the extension of the Silk Road into space. China and Russia have signed on a pact that they're finalizing to build joint lunar bases together. China has just deployed their first Mars rover to join the Perseverance rover and the Curiosity rover, which is currently already on Mars, to really start mapping out properly the red planet and exploring whether there's bacterial life, whether there's fossils of it, whether it's even active currently. What about water traces? We know that the moon has a lot of water. There's initiatives for bringing in mining. China has a program for mining helium-3 on the far side of the moon, which is the best fuel source for fusion power that they're also.
Yep. And Russia has the component that works with it, which is platinum.
Exactly. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And the rare earths are abundant on the moon. You need obviously different mining processes because you're dealing with something that's more diffused in the lunar soil, the regolith. So you have to come up with new ideas of space-time and matter and how to process matter in a way that allows you to extract the resources you want, because they won't come in deposits like they do on the Earth. It's a different system. There's not really a biosphere. So anyway, this is the open system paradigm. And in that paradigm, just like in Lincoln's paradigm and that which was growing in the end of the 19th century, or in Roosevelt's paradigm at the end of World War II, that was tied to a U.S., Russia, China alliance with people like Henry Ford. That was sabotaged with the Cold War and a lot of assassinations in its time, or JFK were trying to revive it. There was all of these things, JFK's process. And that's why I'm glad, I think this is going to be a good place to wrap it up, because I started with JFK and Lincoln's murder at the beginning, right? What was the policy? What were they doing?
Right.
That's more valuable than who done it. Which is just, it's masturbatory. You could just go on for the end of the earth going on to whodunits.
Right. And you'll never find out. You'll never find out.
Yeah. Or if you do, who cares? Like,
exactly.
The guy was Bill Smith, and he was a CIA contractor. And that doesn't tell you that much, really, in terms of what's valuable. How does that change or empower you today?
Right. It's what they were doing. What were they building? What were they up to that made them so much of a threat? Yes,
exactly. So I think today we're in that type of situation where we have a choice to make, once again, of how we choose to define humanity, whether we're a system where we as a species are like any other animal that we can explore in the biosphere, which is defined primarily, our populations are defined primarily by our environment and how much food there is in the environment, and our genetics that allow us to maybe beat out competition in a race for diminishing returns. And just like, we see with monkeys or the rabbits in the wild, if there's a lot of food, their population will grow in accordance with the abundance. And when there's a drought and the food ratio drops, so too does the population. They die, they starve, they eat their young. You don't put a mommy rabbit into prison because it's eating babies, but you do that with human beings because we know better, because we had the ability to increase our abundance through scientific and technological progress and thinking about the future, thinking about droughts, thinking about these things. That ability gives us a responsibility. And that responsibility is where the substance, I think, of our conscience and of our morality, and the reason why we have things like jails, and we don't put, again, lions in prison, but we put humans in prison for eating babies or whatever else. I mean, that's an extreme example, but a proper moral philosophy has to be rooted in something scientific. So human beings, if we have this characteristic where, yes, physically we're very much DNA and genetically similar to other species, but we have this defining species character located in something metaphysical, which is tied to our free will, our conscience, and our power of creative reason, then in that case, the limits to growth are not bounded by any absolute standard. It's bounded only by our imagination and our morality. And so if you actually give people the inspiration and you give them the opportunities to not have to live in scarcity or live in fake systems of education where they're being trained to be dumb, but you're really giving them a mission to, let's say, defend defend the Earth against asteroids. How about that? Russia has proposed it. Jim Bridenstine of NASA has proposed that is a great policy, and I love it. To turn our weapons of mass destruction, which frankly, there's 9,000 or more nuclear missiles spread all over the Earth. They're not going to go away. Nuclear power is not going to go away as much as Greta Thunberg or her owners try to push it. But
oh God,
what we can do is maybe redirect
yeah.
those destructive things towards something constructive, like we know that asteroids have wiped out or have played a role in wiping out most species that have ever existed. There's countless of them. We've only mapped out something like 20% of the asteroids in near Earth orbit that are really, really big. Or no, 80% of the really, really big ones, but 20% we don't even know about. They zoom by us all the time, and at some point, maybe not in our lives, maybe in our lives, we will get hit by destructive ones. Russia got hit by Chelyabinsk in 2012, and that blew out 200 people's eyes with the shockwave. So, why not actually direct our energies towards problem-solving big things in a universe which may be itself a self-perfecting universe guided by constant rates of creation? Maybe it's a living universe that we live in, and it's not a dead universe heading towards a heat death of stasis like is currently taught by a lot of modern physics teachers today, which is just, nobody proved that the universe was born 13.7 billion years ago. I haven't seen proof that convinced me that linear extrapolation is true, that there was a time before existence existed, or that there would be a time that you could extrapolate the universe expanding into a heat death of increased entropy, at which point there will be no more universe. That hasn't been proven to me either. That's a big leap in just a few generations to then say the universe is dying. How about the universe? Right. Maybe it's alive. Maybe it's a living universe of creation, and maybe we're made in the image of that creative force. Maybe that's the case, and maybe we should conform our laws to that idea instead of an oligarchical system of laws based on depopulation, world government, and stasis. Right? Maybe.
And as you were spoken, this just happened. The UNICEF headquarters in Congo just went up in flames.
Oh my God. Yeah.
Oh my God.
Again, big benefactor by the Belt and Road. That's
exactly. This is again another country that's a big benefit, and they just had an Ebola outbreak out of nowhere.
Yeah.
Yes. And so much COVID just going around. Look at the size of this thing. Look at this dude. Holy moly!
That's insane.
The whole place is up in flames.
They said, where did that happen? That was a UNICEF warehouse.
Yeah, warehouse in Kinshasa.
Interesting.
Unbelievable. So there you go, folks. The open system versus the tyranny. What will it be? What will it be? The choice is yours. That's why it's very important that you listen to truth, you listen to ideas, you research, you learn. You don't listen to the rhetoric. You follow the money. Follow the money. You see not what the nations are talking about, but what they're doing. And I want to thank Mathew Ehret for being on. Matt, you are the man. Thank you, sir, so much for joining us. And, buddy, have a safe trip on your vacation, your little respite for the weekend or wherever you're going for this week.
If any of your listeners happen to be in or around the Vancouver area in British Columbia, we will be hosting with my wife. We're going to be hosting an event this coming week on the open versus closed systems. We're going to go through a little bit of history during the seminar on August 15th. Regarding a little bit of history of Lincoln's fight, the fight that I mentioned in more detail with Russia, as well as in the 19th century and how that was subverted. And we'll do a presentation as well on Roosevelt's fight with Henry Wallace and his collaborators to create that new polar system and how that was destroyed. So that'll be something which will be open to all. And again, if you have people in Vancouver listening, they can reach me at matt.ehret at tutamail.com. Maybe you could put that in the description of the YouTube video, and they can get more information on that.
Absolutely. With that being said, folks, like, comment, and subscribe and share. And we'll be back on Monday. Enjoy your weekends. Cheers.